I just want to tell you right now about one shocking story that happened in Brazil. This country, with a population of over 200 million people, has always impressed with its contrasts and diversity. But now we will focus on the metropolis of São Paulo, the economic heart of the state. Among the numerous wealthy families of this city, the Von Richthofen family stood out. Their estate, located in the prestigious Brooklyn district, was valued at around some 3 million Brazilian dollars. Imagine this: luxurious living rooms, cozy bedrooms, a huge swimming pool, a spacious office, and even a private library. All of this was hidden behind a high brick wall, surrounded by exotic plants. The entrance to the mansion was guarded by massive gates, as if emphasizing the status and privacy of the owners' lives. You know, when my colleagues told me about this family, I immediately understood that behind the external glamour and luxury, there could be something more. After all, as the saying goes, the wealthier the family, the more reasons for envy and ill intentions from others. And unfortunately, as subsequent events showed, this assumption turned out to be true. The house itself was surrounded by a high fence that securely protected the residents from prying eyes. However, the staff and guests had to pass through massive gates, which likely symbolized the strength and steadfastness of this family in the eyes of society. At least, that's how it might have seemed at first glance. Allow me to introduce you to the head of the Von Richthofen family, Manfred, a brilliant German engineer. This man held the position of director in a large company responsible for the operation of highways and roads leading to São Paulo. His wife, Mauricia, was a native Brazilian and worked as a local psychiatrist. The story of their meeting is quite romantic. Manfred was studying civil engineering at the University of São Paulo at the time, and it was there that his eyes first met Mauricia's. As they themselves told, it was love at first sight. The friendly and sociable Mauricia perfectly complemented the calm and gentle Manfred. It seemed like fate had brought them together. Later, they got married and started dreaming of children. And so in 1983, their firstborn daughter, named Suzane, was born. 4 years later, her younger brother Andres was born. Both children grew up in a wealthy family and attended the most prestigious private schools in São Paulo. Describing Suzane, she was a rather quiet and shy girl. Although she was not a leader among her peers, she had a few close friends. Suzane was always an obedient daughter and had a warm relationship with her brother. Additionally, the girl showed remarkable abilities in languages and later mastered 3 foreign languages. After graduating from a German high school, she decided to continue her studies at the law faculty of the University of São Paulo. In my opinion, if Suzane had succeeded in the legal field, perhaps her life would have turned out differently. Despite her aspirations for a successful career, the girl never had a need for money. And there was a simple reason for this: her parents were extremely wealthy people. According to my information, the wealth of the Von Richthofen family was estimated at approximately $17 million. And according to unverified information, Manfred had around 10 million euros in a Swiss bank account, which he planned to pass on to Suzane after her studies. So essentially, the girl only had to be an obedient daughter and wait for her inheritance. However, as the year 2002 approached, cracks began to appear in the relationship between the parents and Suzane. The girl had just reached adulthood and, as often happens, was more interested in love than finances. I will now share all the details with you, but only with those incredible people who will subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave any comment to make this video seen by more people. It seemed like the girl had everything: a carefree childhood, brilliant education, and a guaranteed $1 million inheritance. But did this bring her happiness? As subsequent events showed, probably not. By the year 2002, the relationship between Suzane and her parents began to deteriorate. The thing was, Suzane turned 18, and like most of her peers, she became more interested in love than finances. But let's go back a bit to 1999. At that time, the Von Richthofen family visited an airplane model exhibition. Suzane's younger brother Andreas showed a keen interest in this hobby. It was there that he met 19-year-old Daniel Kravinhos, who already had experience in creating flying models. Intrigued, Andreas even asked his parents to pay for modeling lessons with Daniel, and they agreed, not suspecting the consequences it would lead to. While the boys enthusiastically engaged in building airplanes, Daniel unexpectedly caught the attention of Andreas' older sister, Suzane. At first glance, Daniel and Suzane seemed like complete opposites. He, a boy from a poor and troubled family, who was even expelled from college for poor performance. She, a well-bred girl from an aristocratic family who had received a brilliant education. However, despite all the differences, a real passion flared up between them. Suzane was intrigued by Daniel's rebellious nature. He was to her the embodiment of freedom and new exciting emotions. And although the girl understood that her parents would likely not approve of such a choice, she could not resist his charms. So Suzane began to secretly meet with Daniel. She did not yet know the tragic consequences this decision would lead to. For a while, this cunning plan worked. The parents were not thrilled about Daniel's visits, but still allowed him to come, considering him Andreas' regular friend. However, as it is known, lies eventually come to light, and one day, Manfred and Mauritia finally learned the truth about Daniel, that he was not studying anywhere, regularly used prohibited substances, and abused alcohol. Of course, such a discovery could not please them. As an experienced detective, I understand well the parents' desire to protect their child. Manfred and Mauritia spared no effort to ensure a better future for Suzane, and now all their efforts could go to waste because of some garage mechanic. But the lovers were not ready to give up. Unexpectedly, Suzane's younger brother Andreas stood by their side. The boy adored his sister sincerely and considered Daniel his best friend, so he decided to help the two of them by hiding their secret meetings from their parents. While Suzane and Daniel enjoyed their forbidden encounters, Andreas came up with plausible stories for the parents, covering for his sister. But how long would he be able to lead everyone by the nose? And what consequences would this deceit lead to? Friends, creating such content is a very important moment that requires a lot of time. And right now my channel and I are not in the best financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation, and in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors, I will be immensely grateful to you. While Suzane and Daniel's romance was gaining momentum, Suzane's younger brother Andreas became their true guardian angel. He sincerely admired Daniel's rebellious spirit and adored his sister, so he actively facilitated their meetings. While the lovers were hanging out at the auto shop or spending time at Daniel's home, Andreas skillfully covered for them in front of their parents. The boy came up with ingenious excuses to justify Suzane's long absences and divert parental suspicions. But fate gave the couple a chance to be together for a whole month. Manfred and Mauritia set off on a long vacation to Europe, leaving the children in charge of the estate. Suzane, who had already turned 18 at that time, saw this as a great opportunity to prove her maturity and independence to her parents. However, Suzane decided differently. Instead of taking responsibility for the house, she secretly invited Daniel to stay at the mansion. And so the lovers spent a whole month enjoying life by the pool, generously pouring alcohol into their glasses and indulging in ecstasy like seeds. From a detective's perspective, I can assume that these two clearly decided to make up for lost time. After all, they had been forced to hide in corners and strangers' garages until now. And here they were, a luxurious empty house at their disposal. But as it is known, everything in life comes at a price. Upon their return from vacation, the parents learned how Suzane had spent her time in their absence, and thus real battles began in the Von Richthofen family. The scandals and arguments did not cease for weeks. The parents tried to reason with their daughter, but she demonstratively ignored all their advice. Furthermore, Suzane became even more stubborn in her intention to be with Daniel. As the culmination of this confrontation, the girl presented her parents with a bold ultimatum. She demanded that Manfred buy her and her lover an apartment where they could live peacefully and happily. Of course, the family patriarch categorically refused. Manfred stated that Suzane could do whatever she pleased, but at her own expense. And for added emphasis, he threatened to cut off the defiant daughter from financial support. This decision infuriated the girl to the point of fainting. She ranted and stomped her feet uncontrollably, but eventually had to give in. At least she pretended to, because in reality, Suzane had no intention of giving up. She continued to secretly meet with Daniel. Moreover, the two of them began to hatch some sinister plan, a plan that later shocked all of Brazil and even made seasoned police officers shudder. Attention, I ask you to prepare yourself seriously, as what I am about to tell you is capable of shocking even the most resilient. So on November 1, 2022, something horrifying happened at the Von Richthofen family estate. Early in the morning, residents of the prestigious Brooklyn district woke up to desperate screams coming from the house. Some frantic screams of horror that sent chills down their spines. As later revealed, it was the children, Suzane and Andreas, screaming in despair when they saw a gruesome scene in their parents' bedroom. The previous evening, both teenagers had slipped out of the house for their own errands, and when they returned around 4 in the morning, they had no idea of the horror awaiting them inside. Upon entering the mansion, they ran upstairs to the main bedroom, hoping to greet their parents. But instead of Manfred and Mauritia's smiling faces, they were met with a gruesome sight. The bloody bodies of the couple lay on the bed in unnatural poses, It was clear at first glance they had been brutally murdered in their sleep. This was evidenced by the rumpled bed and scattered belongings. Judging from the chaos in the room, the unfortunate couple had woken up but had not even had a chance to resist. It seemed like the attackers burst in and immediately began to torment them. When the police officers arrived at the crime scene, they were faced with a horrifying sight. Montfort and Mauritia were beaten beyond recognition. Their faces turned into complete bloody masks, their bodies covered in numerous wounds, and prominent red marks of strangulation were visible on the victims' necks. What was particularly striking was that Mauritia's head was covered with a plastic garbage bag. Even hardened police officers had to shake themselves to start examining the bodies. Although it initially seemed like burglars had broken into the house, something didn't add up in this version. Yes, the criminals took cash from a suitcase and other hidden places. But was it necessary to be so cruel to the victims for the sake of money? Moreover, expensive items and electronics remained undamaged. Upon inspecting the office and living rooms, the cops came across a series of highly suspicious details. The first thing that caught their eye was the deactivated alarm system. Although the security guards were nearby, they were somehow not notified of the intrusion. Upon closer examination, it became clear. Someone entered the code and deliberately turned off the security system. Furthermore, the ransacked scene seemed somewhat peculiar. Documents and papers, although scattered around the office, were surprisingly evenly distributed. Not at all as it should be after a chaotic search by burglars. Everything indicated an attempt to stage a robbery. Another alarming detail, the doors and windows were left undamaged, meaning the criminals either had keys or someone let them in from the inside. And some rooms were completely bypassed by the criminals as if they knew there was nothing valuable there. While the police tried to unravel this tangle of mysterious circumstances, the public began to build the most incredible assumptions. The media, of course, immediately leaned towards the most obvious suspects, the children of the murdered couple, Suzane and Andreas. Reporters portrayed Andreas as a grief-stricken son barely holding it together, on the verge of losing his mind from the loss of his parents. The boy was so deeply affected by the tragedy that he would start gasping for breath from tears during interviews with journalists. In contrast, Suzane's behavior raised many questions in society. Unlike her brother, the girl remained remarkably restrained and aloof. There were no signs of despair or suffering, as if she was talking about distant relatives, not her own parents. Of course, everyone grieves in their own way, but Suzane's excessive calmness raised certain suspicions. During witness interviews, investigators learned interesting details about how the siblings spent the evening before the murder. It turns out that on October 31 at 9 p.m, Suzane took 15-year-old Andreas out of the house, supposedly to a party at an internet cafe. And all this without the knowledge of the parents, who thought their son had long been asleep in bed. Instead of staying with her brother, Suzane dropped him off at the entertainment venue and went off in an unknown direction herself. As later revealed, the girl booked a hotel room nearby to be alone. Why did she do this? Perhaps to secure an alibi for herself. These questions kept law enforcement officers on edge. But the most alarming detail was yet to come. Before checking into the hotel, Suzane called her boyfriend Daniel. She informed him that they could meet and hang out together. This raised reasonable suspicions, with the lovers planning to have a party. But the strangeness did not end there. Around 4 in the morning, Suzane and Andreas secretly returned home and found their parents dead. So the children went for a walk, and when they returned, Montfort and Mauritia had already been killed. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Moreover, the conflicting testimonies of Suzane and Andreas added more confusion to the case. While the boy claimed that the parents were strongly against his sister's relationship with Daniel, Suzane insisted that Montfort and Mauritia had no issues with her choice of partner. And this, as we remember, was a blatant lie. So the first warning bells rang at this stage of the investigation. Suzane's strange behavior, both before and after the murder, cast suspicion on her and her boyfriend. However, the evidence gathered was insufficient to formally accuse them. On November 1, 2002, the Von Richthofen couple was laid to rest. Relatives, colleagues of the deceased, and numerous media representatives gathered for the farewell ceremony. Journalists were intrigued by a peculiar detail. While Andreas cried uncontrollably, Suzane hardly shed a tear for her parents. Such indifference seemed suspicious even to the average person. Soon, shocking rumors began to spread throughout the town. It was rumored that just 3 days after her parents' death, heartless Suzane threw a loud poolside party at her estate. Allegedly, a crowd of young people gathered there, music blared throughout the neighborhood, and the hostess laughed carelessly, as if there was no sorrow. Of course, investigators could not rely solely on gossip. However, information about Suzane's strange behavior came from several independent sources. But what troubled detectives the most was an anonymous tip. A mysterious informant told the police about a suspicious purchase made by Daniel's brother Christian Krivinhos. The purchase of a Suzuki motorcycle itself did not seem unusual. However, Christian bought this vehicle at a local dealership just a few days after Manfred and Mauritius's murder. At that time, Christian was 26 years old. He paid for the motorcycle in cash with large bills, which automatically raised suspicion. Those who knew the Krivinhos brothers closely unanimously claimed that neither Daniel nor Christian had a steady job or stable income. These guys were regulars at local bars and constantly used prohibited substances. So where did Christian suddenly get such a sum of money? This tip became a kind of final straw for law enforcement. Gathering all available information, the cops began to lean towards the idea that the solution should be sought among the victim's closest circle among family and acquaintances. And above all, they were interested in Suzane and Daniel, whose behavior raised the most questions. Of course, all these coincidences and strange facts could not yet be considered direct evidence. Something more substantial was needed to bring formal charges. So the police decided to focus all their efforts on digging into the young couple and their friends. And very soon, this approach yielded unexpected results. It was the information about the suspicious motorcycle purchase that became the key to unraveling this tangled case. Armed with this lead, the cops immediately summoned Christian Krivinhos, Daniel's brother, for questioning. This young man behaved extremely boldly. He pretended to be a tough guy who knew nothing about the murder. But when the investigators pressed him hard and presented the evidence, Christian finally cracked. What he revealed shocked even seasoned detectives. It turned out that the brutal murder of the Von Richthofen couple was orchestrated by none other than Daniel and Suzane. According to Christian, this couple planned the murder of the girl's parents, and all this was to finally live together and not depend on anyone. And perhaps the main motive was the $17 million that Suzane was supposed to inherit after Manfred and Mauritius's death. Armed with this information, my colleagues immediately arrested the lovers and began interrogating them. And here is where the most interesting part began. Even with fresh handcuff marks on their wrists, Suzane and Daniel managed to accuse each other. The girl insisted that money was not the main motive for her. She claimed that she agreed to the murder under pressure from Daniel, but the boy immediately denied this version. According to him, the prospect of getting rich played a decisive role in Suzane agreeing to the crime. And most strangely, as soon as they found themselves behind bars, these two suddenly broke off their relationship. It was as if there were no intense feelings or shared dreams of a carefree life. Did the millions cloud their judgment and kill all humanity in them? But let's return to the court case. Despite undeniable evidence of guilt, an exception was made for Suzane. She was released on bail until the trial, which began almost 4 years after the crime. And during this time, she clearly did not mourn her parents. Using the services of top lawyers, Suzane almost took control of the entire inheritance. At the same time, she gave interviews to local media, where she cried in a vest and accused Daniel of all sins. She claimed that he ruined her family and life. On screen, Suzane appeared as a distraught and broken girl, a true victim of circumstances. But in my opinion, all this theatrics was just an attempt to whitewash her reputation. And honestly, she didn't succeed very well. Her tears sounded too fake, and her suffering seemed too staged. So when on July 17, 2006, the courtroom was filled, all the cards were laid out. The jury was presented with a detailed chronology of events on that fateful Halloween night. And what they heard took even the most resilient by surprise. It turns out that while Mauritia and Manfred were peacefully asleep, unaware of the impending danger, Suzane cunningly led her younger brother out of the house. Andreas was convinced that his sister just wanted to take him to a party at an internet cafe. The poor boy had no idea of the true purpose behind Suzane's outing. After dropping her brother off at the party venue, Suzane returned home in a car with her accomplices Daniel and Christian. Although the security guard noticed her return, he had no idea that something terrible was about to happen. First, Suzane visited her parents' bedroom supposedly to check if Mauritia and Manfred were sound asleep. Once she confirmed all was quiet, she deactivated the alarm system, allowing the nighttime guest to enter. Then the criminal trio calmly positioned themselves in the living room. They put on gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, pulled their hoods over their heads, and armed themselves with iron bars. Meanwhile, Suzane settled on the couch in front of the TV. Of course, how could she miss her favorite show even during the murder of her parents? And then Daniel and Christian burst into the couple's bedroom and began assaulting them with the bars. Manfred and Mauritia fought desperately for their lives, but the resistance proved futile against the two young, strong men. Seeking to end the bloody ordeal quickly, the brothers grabbed knives and finished off the unfortunate victims. While Montfort died immediately, Mauritia turned out to be more resilient. She was still breathing, though it seemed like life was barely flickering in her battered body. Then Daniel committed an unprecedented act of cruelty. He placed a plastic bag over Mauritia's head and tightened it with all his might, cutting off her air supply. Within minutes, the woman suffocated. After completing their dark deed, the three killers proceeded to stage a robbery to cover their tracks. They pocketed the money, scattered documents in the office, and left. Each went their separate ways to create alibis. Christian went to grab a bite at the nearest fast food joint. Daniel and Suzane pretended to be a couple in a hotel room and even requested a receipt as proof of their presence. But Suzane's behavior was the most cynical. Acting as if nothing had happened, she picked up her brother from the party, brought him home, and started wailing over the bodies of her slain parents. What an acting talent! During the trial, each tried to portray themselves as victims. Suzane blamed Daniel, mentioning some mysterious substances he allegedly constantly gave her to manipulate her. On the other hand, the Cravinhos brothers claimed they acted under the influence of the girl. They argued that she orchestrated everything, and they were just protecting their unfortunate friend from abusive alcoholic parents. However, the forensic examination quickly dispelled these myths. There was no trace of alcohol in the victim's blood. Gradually, a coherent picture began to form in the minds of the jurors, and it was grim news for the defendants. Prosecutor Roberta Treadley portrayed Suzane as the mastermind, the ideological inspiration behind the crime. In her speeches, the girl was depicted as a cunning enchantress driven by a thirst for money and power. According to the prosecution, Suzane was ready to go as far as stepping over her parents' bodies to finally achieve the freedom and wealth she desired. So on July 22, 2006, after 5 days of legal battles, the trio of killers was found guilty. Prosecutors pushed for a 50-year prison term, but unfortunately, such a severe punishment was not handed down to the criminals. Suzane and Daniel were sentenced to 40 years behind bars, while Christian received a lighter sentence of 38 years as an accomplice. However, Suzane has tried multiple times to appeal the court's decision. She claimed that mental disorders pushed her to commit the crime, or that she was not in her right mind. Of course, all these excuses were dismissed, but her charisma did work its magic. Currently, Suzane and Daniel are serving their sentences in a semi-open regime. This means they can go home for holidays and even take vacations, something usually not allowed for murderers. While Suzane serves her conditional sentence, the Von Richthofen family home was long sold to unknown buyers. Andreas was left without a roof over his head, without close relatives. And while his sister enjoys her semi-early release, he wanders the world like a ghost. And the worst part is that after Suzane's release, she will calmly inherit her parents' fortune. The same $17 million for which she committed murder. While her brother suffers in a shelter, the sister will once again lead a luxurious life. By the time her 40-year sentence ends in 2042, Suzane will walk free, rich, and unrestricted, and time will erase all traces of past crimes. This is the bleak conclusion of this scandalous case. I hope, dear viewers, you have learned a valuable lesson. The thirst for money is a terrible thing, and indifference towards family can lead to disaster. But will the criminals themselves learn anything? Unlikely. The roots of evil have grown too deep, and the infection has spread. And somewhere deep in her soul, I am sure Suzane feels no remorse. After all, she has achieved her dream goal, millionaire wealth. Let her even pay for it with her parents' lives. This concludes our episode. Thank you for being with me, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Many exciting investigations await us ahead. So until next time, friends.